Hi everyone, I am bringing today's lecture from, for Pretend, the Singapore Zoo, where I hung out with this awesome jaguar. It's a picture of a jaguar because we're going to be talking about animals. Who does love a giant jaguar? All right, let's get started. For today's lecture, the jaguar and I would like to talk about the origins of the werewolf story in Europe and how it exists within the European context. So let's get started. And we're going to begin with early man. So we're going to go all the way back before we get to what we think of as Europe. We're going to go all the way back to when man was not even fully man yet, 75,000 BCE. So we are talking about like end of Neanderthals, beginning of Homo sapiens as we think of them today. And early hunters and gatherers had proto-shamanistic religions. So this is animistic. We don't yet have the idea of like ritualized practices or holy men yet, but we do have the idea of like mythic figures or at least some understanding of magical beings. So we call them proto-shamanistic. And we understand this based on cave paintings that were made by early humans. In many cases, this early art emphasized man as one of the predatory beasts. So predatory beasts would be seen attacking other animals, and man was depicted as one of those predatory beasts attacking other animals. In other cases, there were depictions of men and predators together in some ways that sort of imply potentially that the man is being represented by the animal's spirit or vice versa, that there's some kind of morphing going on. One example of this is a lot of early cave art in Finland and northern Scandinavia features Ukko. Ukko is the bear man god that exists in early Finnish religion. And so you guys see the image on the top there is from some of the cave paintings from that area that are said to depict Ukko. Also, a lot of early cave paintings show men with other beasts, right? And in many cases, this is the dog. Most animals hunt in packs. Lions hunt in packs, lionesses, right? Wolves hunt in packs, dogs hunt in packs. So humans also hunted in packs. It's actually really, really difficult to hunt by yourself. And so did man domesticate dogs 20,000 years ago? Did dogs domesticate man? This is kind of a really interesting debate in archaeology as well as in zoology and other fields of evolutionary biology. When did humans domesticate dogs, or did dogs domesticate humans? And the reason that we have such a close tie and a bond with dogs is dogs are pack hunters, and dogs have very similar eyes to humans. We have the same kind of like pupil and white structure. If you look at a cat's eyes, they don't look anything like humans. Dogs' eyes actually look a lot like humans. That's why like puppy eyes like melt us to the core. And so it's thought that dogs and men could communicate very early on using eye signals, which is important when you're trying to be quiet and like hunt animals. So did man domesticate dog? Did dog domesticate man? It's a little unclear, but the ties between man and dog, and at that time, man and wolf, right, are very, very blurry. And so there's kind of the idea that a lot of the idea of man is hunter, wolf is hunter, man is wolf, etc., that mythology came from that co-domestication thousands and thousands of years ago. And I want to talk about one ancient myth that is particularly important when we're talking about the development of the mythology of the werewolf, and that is the story of Lycan, right? And this comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses. This is a famous ancient Greek text, and it is an ancient story, right? So Metamorphoses is a collection of different folk stories and ancient stories that were collected by Ovid at the time. But this ancient story is of King Lycaon, and it is believed that he actually tricked the god Zeus into coming to a meal and served him man flesh, so tricked Zeus into eating the bodies of man, and Zeus becomes enraged and punishes him by turning him into a wolf. So this is part of the reason that wolf stories or werewolf stories are often associated with eating flesh or eating man. Think about the big bad wolf eating Granny and then going after Little Red Riding Hood. So we have this notion of werewolves being associated with eating flesh, and that comes from the Lycaon myth. But in addition, I'm going to talk about lycanthropy. Lycanthropy is the idea of morphing into a werewolf. Where do we get the word lycanthropy? From Lycaon, right? From this ancient Greek myth. So mythology turned into this scientific term that's used to describe turning into werewolves. But where do most of our Western conceptions of the werewolf come from? They come from the Celts. They come from my ancestors, the Irish motherfuckers, who have this long-standing tradition of the Fáileabh. And the Fáileabh it's a Celtic idea. It's brought in with the Viking idea as well, but they are men who morph into wolves under the moonlight. And the Fáileabh are great characters, as in they are good people. They are protectors. They are righteous. They defend the innocent. They protect livestock. There's an example in Indonesia that's very similar that we're going to talk about, right? But this idea in the Celtic mythos of the werewolf, right? It should be understood that it is not a monster. It's not something to be feared. The Fáileabh are like these beautiful and majestic creatures that protect the people from danger. And so they are beloved. They are seen as proud figures. It's not like a curse. It's not a terrible thing. It's just something that, you know, happens to some men and they have to protect the community. And so the English took this concept and describe it as the werewolf. And so even though this was a long-standing Celtic tradition, it gets codified in the European tradition in written form when the werewolf character appears in text starting in 1020. And we have Vikings, right? Now, it's important to remember that the Celts are in Ireland, the Vikings are in Scandinavia, but there's a lot of cultural exchange between the two. The Vikings came and conquered parts of Ireland. Irish culture is brought back to Viking culture. So there's a fusion between Scandinavian and Celtic culture in the Viking people. And the Vikings fucking loved werewolves. They were their dogs, lol. And so a lot of our conceptions of the werewolf come, as I said, from the Celtic Fáileabh and from the Viking conception of the werewolf. So Odin himself, the king of the gods, father of Thor, each figure in Scandinavian folklore is represented by an animal. Odin's animal, his is the wolf, and he could actually transform into a wolf to go and seek revenge or justice on those who are wicked. In addition, Loki, that trickster god in Viking mythology, in Norse mythology, has a son, and his son is Fenrir. And Fenrir is a very, very powerful and important figure in Norse mythology. He fucks with the gods. He is the trickster as well, just like Loki. He's the son of Loki. But he is a giant wolf that fucks with the gods, and his role in terms of mythology is that he is supposed to be the one who kills Odin. So Odin is supposed to be killed by his son, Loki's son, so his grandson, right? Fenrir, the giant wolf. There is also a very important mythological story of Sigmund and Sinfotli, and these are two friends who like morph into wolves. It's a whole long, complicated story. You guys are reading about it, but basically it's the idea of men morphing into wolves and then having to protect each other, and their friendship is what brings them back from the brink and turns them back into humans and develops their love together. So there are lots of different ways that the werewolf figure, or man morphing into wolf, or wolves being intelligent and interacting with humans, all of these exist in Viking mythologies in various ways and would come to shape European mythologies about the werewolf. And so we see Celtic tales of the werewolf and Viking tales of the werewolf appear in English, Welsh, and Celtic writings starting in the 12th century. These move through the 13th century into France, and by the 16th century, we see them all over the Mediterranean. So by the Italian Renaissance, we see the werewolf myth has moved from Northern Europe all the way down to Mediterranean Europe. Now, the Romans had their own conception of the werewolf. We actually see in the stories of Petronius, who was a court writer for Emperor Nero. He tells the story of Nicaros, and Nicaros was a man who actually transforms into a wolf in order to seek revenge for an incident that happens to him. The reason I'm talking about this now, why didn't I talk about this in the ancient examples, is that even though this was a Roman example, it didn't really appear in any of the mythology of Europe until the Renaissance. It gets rediscovered, the writings get rediscovered during the Italian Renaissance, when there's this neoclassicalism that becomes part of the art and the literature from the Renaissance. And so Petronius's writings are rediscovered. And so actually the idea of the Roman werewolf influences later Mediterranean conceptions of the werewolf, right? Not until the Renaissance, until the 15th and 16th centuries do we see this writing emerge and become part of that mythology. So while all of that Celtic and Viking shit was going on, this Roman conception was buried away. And so that's why I'm not bringing it up until we get to the Renaissance, where suddenly it does become important and fits in with all of those myths that have now been brought from Celtic and Viking culture through France and into the Mediterranean. Then they go, oh, wait, we already have this myth that exists. This really, really makes sense. And so the werewolf myth is adopted into the Roman Catholic world. And we see werewolf hunts around the same time that we see witch hunts. But these are not nearly as like powerful or meaningful, because in most cases, what they're actually looking for is an actual wolf that like ate a bunch of animals and fucked up their shit. So most of the werewolf hunts usually ended with somebody finding a giant wolf and killing it and be like, oh, we caught the werewolf. We just caught him when he was in his wolf form. And it's like, nah, dog, you just killed a really big werewolf. Like, you didn't kill any of your friends. Don't worry. Right. And the issue is that there wasn't a single text. There was no like Malleus Maleficarum. There was no like single like text the way there were for the witch hunts or something like that, that said, here's what a werewolf is. Here's how you find one. Here's how you kill one. So in many cases, it was just like, hey, we locally have kind of this folklore legend about dudes turning into wolves. Oh shit, we killed a bunch of wolves. Hope it wasn't any dudes. Like, very, very loose, not nearly as coordinated or orchestrated or like clear cut or religiously motivated as the witch hunts or even the vampire hunts, right? The werewolf hunts were kind of just like, we got to like get a big mob together because we got to go kill this giant wolf, and like I can't do it alone. So let's just all like cheer about werewolves and then go fuck up this really big dog that's like fucking us all up. Right? So not nearly as impactful. That being said, though, there were stories and myths about werewolves in the Middle of Ages, and in most cases, these were like morality tales. They were designed to teach you a lesson. And so like The Boy Who Cried Wolf and like Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf, right? So all of these stories where the wolf is the villain and it's really just a morality tale, but you want to use the big, bad, scary thing from the woods. And in most cases, in the woods of Europe, that's going to be a wolf, right? It's not going to be a jaguar. It's not going to be like a tiger. That's why in Europe, we don't see men morph into tigers and jaguars the way that we see, tigers in Asia, where we see were-tigers, or jaguars in, Mesoamerica, where we see the nagual, right? Instead, in Europe, what's the big, bad, scary creature? It's a wolf. And so anytime you need to talk about like the metaphor of nature being dangerous, you use this concept of the werewolf. So we see them in horror stories, we see them in fairy tales, but ultimately the werewolf comes to represent kind of this morality about man versus nature. It appears in, for example, a very famous text in the 1550s where, the history of the Swedes, you're going to talk about Scandinavian mythology, you're going to talk about werewolves, right? And it comes to the fore in the Brothers Grimm Little Red Riding Hood, where the wolf eats the grandmother and pretends to be the grandmother. So again, wolf as man, man as wolf. It's a morality story about trusting your family. All right, everyone, that is our lecture for today about the werewolf myth in Europe. Thanks so much for listening, and I cannot wait to discuss this in section, and next week discuss werewolves and other metamorphs all around the world. So take everything you learned in this lecture and get ready to build upon it in our subsequent discussions. Thanks so much for listening.